to ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with Loganair and Highlands and Islands airports regarding the suspension of many flights from 17th March.
Minister Jenny Gilruth.
It is disappointing that Loganair have suspended these routes, although I am hopeful for a resolution before the 17th of March. I met with the Chair and Managing Director of HIAL on Saturday morning to stress the need for a timely resolution to the pay dispute, and I asked for a new business case to be presented urgently to Ministers. Following further discussions with unions yesterday morning, HIAL have developed further proposals which, subject to HIAL's board agreement, will be considered shortly by Ministers. Transport Scotland officials have also discussed the situation with Loganair, which operates these routes on a commercial basis.
Neil Bibby.
The inescapable and scandalous fact is that the Scottish Government would still be sitting on its hands, ignoring the damage to the Highlands if it had not been for the dramatic escalation threatened by Loganair. That's not how things should work. Cancer patients should not have to be subjected to fear in order to get a response from government. Islands should not be out of sight and out of mind until there is the risk of political embarrassment. Why has the Transport Minister suddenly discovered a role now when she repeatedly refused to become involved over the past 5 months, while HIAL said their own hands were tied by the Scottish Government's pay policy?
Minister.
I think Mr Bibby has somewhat mischaracterised the situation. I meet with the unions across the transport sector on a regular basis, and most recently I met, of course, with our airline unions at the end of January to discuss this very matter. So it's not true to say that I have not been engaged throughout this process. And I do share Mr Bibby's concerns, which is exactly why, when this decision was communicated to me on Friday, I sought the first available opportunity to speak directly to HIAL on Saturday morning. Now, clearly there's a need for an urgent resolution to this dispute. I'm particularly concerned, for example, about any implications in relation to medical appointments. I think, as the member alluded to, that is a matter that I've asked Transport Scotland to raise directly with Loganair. Now, remember, this is, I think, important for members to recall. This is a decision by Loganair, and Loganair's view is that action short of a strike in the form of a work to rule leads to short notice cancellation. So, for example, when staff absence can't be covered due to an overtime ban, Loganair have therefore taken the commercial decision in that respect because of the costs incurred by cancellations. But this is not a matter in which government ministers can become involved because the Scottish Government has no direct role in their provision.
Neil Bibby.
Many people in the Highlands and Islands believe that without Loganair's escalation, the Minister would still be missing, there would be no extra money on the table, and the indefinite prospect of cancellations and disruption would still be hanging over the Islands with no end in sight. The Minister cannot be unaware of the damage done to fragile island economies by the ferries debacle. Why, for the past 5 months, has she failed to prevent that damage being compounded by the ongoing disruption to island air services? If extra money can be found now, why could it not have been found last week or last month to avoid the massive disruption that has already taken place and the hundreds of hospital appointments that have already been cancelled?
Minister.
Again, I would refute Mr Bibby's characterisation of the situation. I meet with our trade union partners on a regular basis. It was the 31st of January that I last met with our airline partners in relation to this very matter, and I recognise that that dialogue was ongoing. Of course, I will again reiterate, Presiding Officer, this decision in relation to the cancellation of flights is not a decision that has been taken by government ministers, and nor is it one that I have any input in as a government minister. However, I did meet with HIAL on Saturday morning at the earliest opportunity to explain the urgency to them directly. HIAL met with the unions yesterday to discuss this new draft proposal. That proposal is now being put to the HIAL board, and I expect an urgent update on the new proposal later today. But the focus here for government ministers is absolutely on addressing the underlying issue, which of course is settling the HIAL pay dispute.
Alistair Allen.
Presiding Officer, it would be fair to say that my island constituents are horrified at Loganair's recent action. The impact on patients, including cancer patients alone, is almost unthinkable. Seriously ill people rely on this service to access treatment on the mainland, and it is unclear how operations, appointments and scans will be carried out otherwise. Loganair is a company which has directly and indirectly received substantial funding through the public purse and has now placed NHS Western Isles in an atrocious position. So, did Loganair give the Government or Island Health Boards any indication that such a disproportionate and draconian move by them was even being considered?
Minister.
I think in answer to the member's question, probably no. Loganair informed me of their decision, as I outlined in my response to Mr Bibby, on Friday morning to suspend, and that was obviously the decision to suspend these two routes that we're discussing today. Those services, though, as I explained to Mr Bibby, are commercial operate on a commercial basis, so it's not a matter in which government ministers can become involved. I very much understand the performance on the Stornoway to Inverness route has declined in recent times. In part, apparently that is because of a reduction in travel by Western Health Council staff, according to Loganair. That's been a major contributory factor, but also a reduction in relation to NHS staff who use ferries for patient travel. But I very much recognise the importance of these routes, and particularly in relation to these critical transfers, as the member has alluded to. I have asked my officials to speak directly to Loganair on that point.
Donald Cameron.
We now have a 6-week suspension of Loganair flights. We've had a number of recent ferry failures, and we've had a betrayal of the SNP's promise to dual the A9. Travel to and from the Highlands and Islands is in crisis due to this government's failure to deliver adequate lifeline transport links. So when will this SNP Green government get its act together and make island transport a top priority?
Minister.
I don't accept the characterisation that Mr Cameron has outlined today in relation to transport to our islands and our island communities. The vast majority of my time, Presiding Officer, as Transport Minister, is spent dealing with these matters directly. I recognise the disruption on the network in recent times. I'm sure I'm about to answer a topical question further to that. However, it's important to reiterate that the way to resolve this situation with HIAL is to get a resolution between the unions and between HIAL. That's why I spent my morning on Saturday discussing with HIAL how they were urgently going to put forward a new proposal for ministers to approve. I await that proposal, and once I have it, we will be able to move forward and hopefully to unlock this dispute and provide greater reassurance to Mr Cameron's constituents.
Liam MacArthur.
Thank you. I was contacted earlier today by the family of a constituent to say their mother is booked to fly to Shetland for a mastectomy operation later this month. Due to the suspension of air services between Orkney and Shetland, she now faces either an 8-hour ferry journey the day after her operation or falling almost a week away from home. So does the Minister accept that these are lifeline air services, and can she explain why HIAL bosses were required to stick to a 5% pay offer after counterparts at Calmac were freed up to offer staff more? And will she now ensure that everything possible is done to bring to an end this long-running and damaging dispute?
Minister.
I understand the sentiment behind the member's question. Of course, the scenario in relation to Calmac is slightly different to other public sector bodies. However, I recognise the concern that he's raised today. In relation to the constituent and their experience that he's outlined, I've been more than happy to look at the specifics of that in detail. Clearly, these flights will operate on a commercial basis, and it's therefore very challenging for ministers to intervene in relation to their provision. Indeed, I raised this matter directly with Transport Scotland over the course of the weekend and again today. And whilst I'm not able to do that directly, I will make these representations to Loganair on behalf of Mr MacArthur and other members' constituents, because I do recognise the concern here.